Welcome and good evening. This is Melanie Linder. I'm Vice President for Marketing and Communications. I want to welcome you tonight and thank you for joining us. I want to remind everybody that to submit your questions, use the Q&A function, and we'll be going through the list and passing them along to our panelists. To start out, I'm going to introduce our panelists tonight, and then to start submitting your questions now, and then I'll turn it over to President Armacost, who will be making some opening remarks, and then we'll get right to your questions. So I'm going to start with Tamaqui Bailey, a Special Assistant to the President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Then we have Donna Smith, our Assistant Vice President for Equal Opportunity and Title IX. Stacy Barboa Peterson, our Director of Student Diversity and Inclusion. And then Jeff Molesky, our Assistant Director for Student Diversity and Inclusion. So with that, President Armacost, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Melanie, and thanks to everybody who has signed in tonight. I know this was put together on just a couple days' notice, and so it means a lot that you're here, and here to ask a lot of really good and tough questions. I'm certain, and I'm gratified by the team that chose to be here tonight. So you just heard their introductions, and they're incredible leaders, and they care deeply about the success of our campus, and so I know that they will have a lot of insights to add as well. Again, in addition to my thanks, let me just give you a quick heads up on what I hope to accomplish today. One is to explain the decision to pull back or to not go forward with the gender inclusion policy, and to discuss the reasons why, but also to listen to your comments and your questions and to answer those, but most importantly, to listen to your ideas about how to make the UND campus a better place for all, but in particular for our trans and gender nonconforming students, faculty, and staff members. This is important for each of us to do. My decision to not push the policy forward was based on a number of factors. So let me just share those thoughts with you. First, I have to acknowledge the work of the committee that drafted the policy. They did incredible work, and they actually moved initiatives forward on our campus that wouldn't have happened otherwise. In fact, they codified new state board level policy on the inclusion of names and pronouns into our campus information systems. And if you saw Inside Higher Education earlier this week, there was a story about the struggle that campuses have had in actually making that happen. And so this committee actually did just what I would say revolutionary work in terms of making that happen and having our information systems recognize the identity of our students, faculty, and staff members. The second thing I wanted to talk about is that the policy's purpose was to pull together existing laws and policies into a single accessible document. So the committee worked hard to pull the relevant information from these sources and to have it in a single document that would be usable by the campus. Third, the rights and policies called out in this draft gender inclusion policy exist in other policies and laws. And Jeff Molesky's awesome letter this morning in UND Today, if you haven't read it, you should. It shares the work of the committee and the points and the protections that are offered to the members of the trans and gender nonconforming community. So, and Jeff did a great job also citing all the resources that are available to folks on our campus. And this is a great statement of where we are now through the hard work of the committee, but it also points to opportunities for us to even get better. The fourth point is that there are ongoing federal court cases. In fact, one is called Merriweather, and here they raise issues, and this is a cautionary case. It raises issues about compelled use of pronouns, and so we can talk about that more. But that was another factor that came into the decision process. The fifth point was that there was serious legislative interest and reaction to the draft policy. And as the leader of the institution, I have to take these inputs as important and as indicators of the opinions of our legislatures and their thoughts, and the recognition and the appreciation that those thoughts can certainly have an impact on university funding. The next thing I want to mention is that pulling back on the proposal, given the amplification of arguments on both sides, in particular, the things I was hearing after our press conference, made me realize that pulling back on the proposal could actually help things move forward in the following way, that sometimes to advance meaningful conversations about the toughest issues that we face, we have to avoid hitting that stone wall. And so this sounds counterintuitive, of course, but the pulling back on the policy would give us some breathing room, that rather than facing harsh rhetoric, it would allow us to actually pull back and have meaningful conversations, both on campus and with legislative delegations. And then also, because the protections and rights, again, are articulated already in laws and other policies, I felt the proper decision was to pull back, given all of these forces. And I know this comes at great disappointment and emotional impact, particularly to our LGBTQ plus community, and in very specific terms to our trans and gender nonconforming community. I recognized that as I made the decision, but it also places a huge burden on me and on all of us to show our continued support and protection of the rights and opportunities for our trans community on our campus. And so a great indication of internal support came the other day when the student body voted 12-1 with one abstention to endorse or to support a resolution that supports the draft policy. And so what I'm seeing is on campus strong support and of the protections that are necessary for our trans community. And so it's my responsibility to make sure those are there. And again, the decision to pull back on the draft policy was a function of these various factors, these forces that were pushing in several directions. I just felt the prudent thing to do was to do that. Many of you will disagree. Some of you will agree, but it's the decision I felt was in the best interest of moving the conversation forward on our campus, and also to make sure that we can continue to operate effectively as a university. So with that, I see the chat and the Q&A, and let me remind you, of course, that use the Q&A function, not the chat function, to put your questions in, please.
All right, I'm going to start with our first question, and I'm going to start by turning it over to you, President Armacost, and then you may turn it over to other of our panelists to expand on the answer. But what is UND's plan to mitigate the potential backlash that trans non-binary students may experience on campus due to the discontinued use of the draft policy?
Right, I'll call on Donna Smith in a moment, but let me just remind everyone that the protections of our trans community are in place already. There are systems and response mechanisms and support mechanisms that are there to support them. The absence of this draft policy, or the absence of that policy, doesn't change that fact. And so Donna, and I know Jeff and Stacy can also weigh in on other support, and so can Tambakwi as well. So let's start with Donna.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Those protections that were there prior to the draft policy, and when we were having discussions about the draft policy, there are protections there for our LGBTQ, for our trans students, for our non-binary students, for our students regardless of their gender identity. Those protections are there prior to the draft policy discussion, and they continue to be there. That hasn't changed. What I expect that we will continue to do over the next weeks and months on campus is to continue to have conversations to ramp up to enhance our efforts for educating all members of our campus community, to create an understanding and move toward a climate that is continues to be inclusive, and where we can grow that understanding and feeling of community on our campus. But I would invite others to weigh in on that also.
And a great educational resource is that piece I mentioned that Jeff had put together that ran in UND today. So Jeff, Stacy, Tambakwi, additional comments?
Yeah, I think on my end is just making sure that people are aware of what we currently offer on campus. So knowing where, if we need to navigate a process, whether that be updating our name in Campus Connection, or looking at our NDSU identifiers, and being able to articulate and explain how to go through that process, because it's not easy steps. It does take a little a little bit of knowledge and understanding to kind of go through that. So I think the big piece is going through that letter and going on our website and actually understanding the process. So when you're working with people or having conversations with folks, that you understand it as well, because it does take a full effort for it. So I think if there are students, you can get them connected with our Office in Student Diversity and Inclusion as well. We're more than happy to help. But I think the number one piece of it is really kind of building your own understanding and your own competencies around issues that are really impacting the community.
I think in addition, Jeff started great with the document that he put out, the letter that he put out earlier this week. And I think in addition to that, we've talked about how our department can try to, I think, amp up the awareness around the support and resources that we currently do have, and try to make that a more seamless process for students so that they're not going to multiple different locations, or so that they at least know where to begin. Because right now we have a lot of students who maybe they're seniors and they've been here for 4 years and they don't know that there are processes and procedures that they could have been working with during their time here at UND. And so I think it's really looking at what we can do from our office and from the work that we're doing, and how we can amplify those supports that we currently have on campus.
Thank you. Andy, I'm going to turn this next question over to you. Why does the church and politics matter more than our NB and transgender students' rights, our non-binary and transgender students' rights?
Yeah, their rights don't matter any more than the rights of our transgender students. The issue that really caused pause was the issue that was, and Donna can share more because she chaired the committee, but in the draft policy, it says we will use pronouns. The chief complaint coming out of the North Dakota Catholic Conference was the compelled use of pronouns. And I mentioned the case before, the federal case called Merriweather, that actually talks about that balance. And it actually found, and Donna, you're the lawyer, you can actually describe it better than I can, but it found that a professor not using the preferred pronouns was permitted to do so, or there were alternate ways that they could address without referring to them as Ms. or Mr. or he or she. And so this isn't a question of one group having more rights than another. It's a matter of making sure that we respect the rights of all on our campus. Donna, over to you.
Thanks. So I think I can speak for the group that worked on the draft policy in saying that the intent of the policy was not to force, not to compel language, not to necessarily force individuals to use pronouns, but to explain or to show the university's expectations that its campus community members will treat other members with respect, and that we would expect individuals to address someone, to treat someone in accordance or in alignment with their expressed gender identity, whatever that might, whatever that, that addressing might look like, that would be done in accordance with their gender identity. And throughout all of this, this really is a balance, because we have protected rights for individuals on our campus for a variety of reasons: age, race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion. And we have to balance all of that, all of those rights, so that exactly one person's right or one group's rights are not given more favor, or that they don't have more rights than another group. It's all about balancing that. And in the Merriweather case, really, I think the school did a lot of things, could have done a lot of things better. And I don't think that case is, it's instructive for the facts of that case, but not necessarily something that would, that is a mandatory requirement for other universities under different facts. It really is just specific to that case. And I'm afraid I'm going to get too much into the legalese on it, and I think I'll just stop there.
All right, I'm going to address the next question to you, President Armacost. When committees do good work, as you described, and formulate well-reasoned, sound proposals, which are then dismissed by administrators due to legislative bullies, this has a negative impact on shared governance. Why should faculty and staff continue to participate in committee work if their thoughtful proposals are likely to be dismissed?
I'll go back to what I said in my opening comments, which is the impact of the committee wasn't just a draft document. It was substantial change in other areas of the campus, which have actually happened. And Jeff outlined those in his article. So the work of the committee, I guess a culminating piece could be the piece of paper that says we have a gender inclusion policy, but the protections and the ideas that emerged from the committee are and have had a tremendous impact on our campus in terms of moving things forward for our trans community. So that's why. I mean, if you're looking for the impact of the committee, I think the committee would say, we've done good work. I know the members of the committee are likely saying we're disappointed that the policy wasn't approved, and Jeff and Donna will probably nod in agreement with that statement. But I think they would also nod in agreement that they have had a strong impact on the lives of the human beings. That's the essence of shared governance as well, is making that impact across the campus. And I would encourage, and you have a receptive person in your president to hear these proposals. Again, the decision was based on a number of factors that I cited earlier. And again, the opportunity to actually, in a sense, keep the conversation alive on our campus rather than having it squelched.
President Armacost, the next question is it's widely known that by the community that there were actual threats of significant funding cuts, which affected the decision to cease work on the draft policy. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, so I always hate the term threats because that's it's a somewhat pejorative word, but I do know that during the special legislative session this fall, there were active discussions among legislators about the idea of a consequence, a large financial consequence to the university if we had adopted the gender inclusion policy, or the gender identity, the gender inclusion policy. So that's I won't get into any more, but it was a substantial piece. It was in the tens of millions of dollars, and it would, I think, have had a profound impact. And similarly, and I mentioned this to the Herald last week as well, that we know that the legislature has exercised the power of the purse previously, right? So we saw that with Senate Bill 2030, which dealt with abortion and support to abortion providers, or grants and contracts with abortion providers. And the legislature made it very clear about what their expectations were. Now, that will lead obviously to a debate about academic freedom and shared governance and all those matters. And we have to wrestle with those as a community. And similarly, we would face the same thing here.
Thank you. I'm going to address this next question to Donna Smith. Why were the Greek societies originally excluded from the policy draft?
Sure. So under Title IX, which is the federal law that prohibits discrimination based on sex in our programs and activities, Greek organizations are exempted from a portion of that deals with their ability to choose their members. So Greek sororities and fraternities are allowed to be single-sex institutions. And that's in accordance with Title IX, and that's what that kind of exemption language was under in the draft policy.
Thank you. I'm going to start with President Armacost with this next question, but you may also want to include Donna Smith and others in the answer. What are your thoughts on how a judge ruled public university professors have a constitutional right to intentionally misgender trans students in the classroom? What would happen if someone is intentionally misgendered in our classrooms?
Right. So this gets into our anti-harassment, anti-discrimination policies, and there's a threshold in those policies that determine whether or not one's access to education or employment are impacted. Donna can say a lot more, but the intentional misgendering, right? So the question is, if somebody has a religious conviction that doesn't allow them, or they feel they can't call somebody by the wrong pronoun, or not the wrong pronoun, but the pronoun that they identify with that's different from their birth sex. The question is whether that's constitutionally protected speech. And Donna can say more either about Merriweather or this idea of what protections are in place for intentional misgendering.
Thanks. So yes, the policy talked about intentional misgendering, and that did get a lot of attention. Speech that we may not like is still protected speech. Even hate speech is protected speech under the First Amendment, under our laws, until it gets to the point that it is recognized as harassment. And our different state and federal laws have different definitions for that. But in general, to be harassment that is in violation of a law, and then of course in violation of our existing policies, and that hasn't changed, that speech has to be so severe and pervasive that it, and objectively offensive, that it essentially denies an individual equal access to their educational opportunities or their work opportunities, as the case may be. And so when intentional misgendering or any other kind of harassment reaches that threshold where it is so severe and pervasive and objectively offensive that it denies someone their ability to equally access their programs, then that is potentially a policy violation. So that part has not changed. We recognize that people make mistakes all the time, and people may be misgendered. People who do it accidentally. People don't understand. I don't know what your gender identity is. And I think we all have to be able to give each other some grace to learn, to be able to apologize if we get it wrong, and then be able to try to do it better. But it's different when that is done intentionally with the intent to harass somebody. And that is when it will become a policy violation under our policies and under the law. When we have that conflict between someone's religious beliefs and their right to religious expression, which is also protected under the law, and an individual's gender identity and their rights, what we would do in that situation is really have to work with the individuals to try to find a solution that works for both individuals. And it can be complicated, it can be hard, but that would be our aim in every situation.
And we have spoken with folks who have said, although they might not use a person's proper pronouns, they would be willing to use their chosen name, right? So this is, I think, what we have to drive to as a campus is that those conversations, small group conversations, large group conversations, to talk about how we honor and respect one another and arrive at solutions where we say, tell you what, we can actually have a sense of respect and dignity for everybody on the campus, and figure out a way to do that with a common approach.
Donna, I'm going to send this next question to you. If the specific use of the gender inclusion policy draft was already in the UND Code of Conduct, why was the task force initially created?
Sure. So it was created for a couple of reasons. One reason was, and President Armacost touched on this just a little bit at the beginning, we didn't have on campus there was a state board procedure that for students that delineated when we use legal names and when we would use chosen names. That procedure was in place. Some updates happened, and that was all kind of going on at the same time as this group was doing their work. But that was something that we wanted to give some attention to, was to provide some clarity for people on campus about use of legal names, use of chosen names. We also recognize that this particular marginalized group, there are a lot of people who have misunderstandings or have questions. And we wanted to be able to pull together the guidance and the university's policies that addressed discrimination and harassment and our efforts to be inclusive on campus. We wanted to put all of those in one place where individuals could find it. And that was really, I think the two main goals of the group was to get those things in a place where they could be easily found and accessed and relied upon by the campus.
President Armacost, what is the university response to students, staff, and faculty who feel this position will push them to leave the institution?
Right. That's a wonderful question. It's one I worry about, just because I know that we have great aspirations among the people sitting in front of you to offer the best possible place for our trans community. And I would just look to the hard work of everybody on this team and their earnest and ongoing and unceasing efforts to take care of you. They will do that. They will make life better for you here at UND. And we're not going to turn our backs on you. Tom Bequeath, you probably have some additional thoughts too.
Yeah. I think this is a hard place for a lot of people. I think a lot of people are hurting. A lot of people are, as by some of the questions, the response just in terms of not feeling safe, potentially not feeling valued. And so we have to acknowledge that first, and this is a hard place. And I can hear for some people saying that, hey, this may or may not be the institution for me. I think we always will weigh kind of where we are and our individual needs, our family needs, and all those things. And what I will also say is that we have to continue to demonstrate our commitment to making sure that we're not just honoring, but that we're demonstrating the respect, the value, and those things that are in place to safeguard and protect communities on our campus. And so Donna talked earlier about when things rise to the level of harassment, that there are things in place that we respond to. We're engaging in educational experiences, initiatives across the campus. But I think we have to be committed to the full inclusion of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, individuals, all those people who are part of the fabric of the university. And I'll say, I'm going to connect to a previous statement earlier about shared governance. We get better when we are working together. It is not administrators, it is not just students, it is not just faculty, it is not just staff. I think we have to work at this together. I think we have to work to really have a greater understanding about what does it mean to be inclusive, and how do we move away from exclusionary practices. And so the hard work of the task force was trying to do that, as Donna said, to articulate what are the protections already on campus, because so many people didn't know that. And so it's important for people to have that information. The great work that Jeff and Stacy are doing in their area, they continue to support not only students, as rightly so, but also making themselves available for faculty and staff. We have the University Counseling Center. We have a lot of ways on campus that we can continue to support students. And we have to make sure that we're earning everybody's trust, respect, and that they are feeling that we're doing the right thing. And I think we have to do that together. So I could talk forever on this, I won't, but I think that it may feel like for a lot of people an uphill road, but we have to walk in arms together. And I think that we can work and continue to work towards making this a safe place. And we have to hear from people within the community, all our community, so that we know where people are. I can't assume safety. I can't assume value. I can't assume somebody feeling respected and honored. So we have to make sure that we're hearing from you all to make sure that we are doing right by you all. And I think that's really important.
All right, President Armacost, you stated that the reason you shied away from the policy was primarily based on funding. Since the induction of the Civil Rights Act, the wording about whether it is inclusive of trans people, Since then, there have been little movement towards inclusion. Why do you feel this is the proper move to move the conversation forward if it hasn't happened yet?
Okay, so let me address the primary reason for pulling back on the policy. Wasn't, I mean, funding, of course, should get our attention, but the big issue was that the committee had done such great work on putting codifying protections, codifying opportunities to represent, for trans people to represent themselves as their authentic selves in our systems and on our campus. And so, so it was, I can't put a finger on one thing and say it was the money. The threats of the legislature, or not threats, I said I wouldn't say that earlier, but the legislative power and the power of the purse certainly influences that decision. But it would have been a totally different conversation if we didn't have protections in place. And so the second half of the question, Melanie, remind me of, I was just focused on the premise of the question.
That if the move to stop work on the draft policy was the right move to move this forward. Yeah,
so again, the reason to pull back on the draft policy was again to, again, the protections were in place for the trans community. And in addition, the opportunity to actually re-engage, and we saw this, we had a number of brave trans students, Leo and CJ and Claire spoke in front of City Council on Tuesday, and their very testimony, their discussion opened the eyes of a lot of people. It was there was a compassion there that didn't exist the previous week, and by pulling back on the policy, I think it enables us to have more meaningful conversations for people who really don't understand what the challenges that our trans and non-binary community faces. So again, it wasn't a single thing, but I viewed this as the right move for those reasons.
President Armacost, there's a question of, are the funding cut threats public knowledge?
I talked about them to the newspaper last week, so yes.
All right. President Armacost, also, what would you tell trans non-binary students who no longer feel safe on the UND campus?
Two things. One, we have great work done by the folks on this panel to look out for you. And if there are ever threats, come see our EO Title IX office, come see Donna Smith. She and her staff will take great care of you. The other thing to do is speak with other current students, hopefully about the support that they get from the people you see on this panel. And I know I've worked alongside or met with the QTA and had some open conversations with them as well. And I'm going to continue to try to earn their trust. And so prospective students who are looking at UND or students who are looking to leave, I would really encourage them to reach out to their peers in the community and have that conversation with them, get their sense of the protections that they feel and the support that they feel, and come to us with areas that we need to fix. Again, the committee did great work to identify a number of those areas, but there's many more things we can do as a campus.
All right, President Armacost, what will the school's response be to any potential harassment of Catholic students, faculty, clergy incurred in the backlash to the cancellation of the policy?
Right, the same area. So the same protections that exist for our trans and non-binary students exist for religious protection as well. The discrimination and harassment laws and policies on campus also apply to you. Donna, any additional thoughts?
No, I think you, I think you really wrapped it up.
What will administration be proud of these decisions in a century when our history will judge our prejudices? President Armacost, I think I'll start off with you on that one.
Yeah, I would love for people to look back at this time and say that the thoughts and the opinions of our campus matter deeply, and that university took steps to make sure that everybody was welcome on our campus.
This question, I'm going to turn to Donna Smith. The question is, how many trans people were on the task force?
So we sought out, I worked with Jeff to seek out student representation to be a part of that group. And we did have students who were members of that group. I don't know, none of them identified to me specifically that they were trans.
Thank you. President Armacost, the question is, doesn't dropping the draft policy go against your value of love your people? What will we love you until it interferes with funding?
Yeah, so on the funding question, it's interesting. The dramatic funding cuts, we've seen this before on campus, yields loss of positions, loss of the employment opportunities for many people on the campus, including our LGBTQ members. And so so I think a recognition of this is important as well, because I think I owe it to you, our LGBTQ members, to be able to keep offering great programs on our campus. Significant funding cuts, and again, we don't know what exactly the legislative action or counter action might be, but the fact is, in order to create that loving environment on campus and have the resources to do it, funding plays an important role.
President Armacost, I'm going to start with you, but I think others on the panel will want to chime in as well. How do you intend to claim and advertise the UND community as inclusive to both current and potential students without this policy?
Yeah, we keep coming back to the policy, and it's important. It's such an important. It was obviously an important statement to make, that UND values gender inclusion. But I'll keep responding that the protections and the support systems that we have on campus are growing by the day, and we have. Again, everything that was in the policy is in practice, and so those protections and those resources that are available exist, and through articles like the one Jeff wrote, and information that will be or is already on the Student Diversity and Inclusion website, there is great resources out there for people to tap into. What I would hope is people see it, they take advantage of the resources. We commit to and fund additional resources on campus to make sure that we provide even better support to this community. And then in so doing, people say, this is a campus that really takes care of its LGBTQ plus members. And in so doing, the word gets out, people talk, right? Prospective students will call up and ask their friends or people who are involved with the QTA. They'll ask them, hey, what's life on campus? And we need to be able to say, it's an accepting place. I'm treated fairly, I'm treated with love, and I'm treated with respect.
Thank you. President Armacost, how will you demonstrate to this group that their humanity is valued at all times and is not at the mercy of state legislation or financial repercussions?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon me, as I said, to be involved in your lives, to provide the personal support and the support on campus to make sure your needs are met. And I need to hear you. I need to offer the forums to get your feedback and to make sure that we're moving in that right direction. So you have my personal commitment to do that. Somebody had asked earlier today about, come on, you're new to the campus. How do we know you're legitimate? And I go back to my previous life at the Air Force Academy, where in the period of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there was an urgent need on our campus to make sure that our LGBTQ plus community was taken care of. And that was from 2010 on. The repeal happened in 2011. And through my entire time there, I devoted myself to make sure that they had the resources they needed and they were taken care of. And so I pledged the same thing here. But I guess when you pull back a policy, I realize you're now going to say, what did this guy just do? And I owe it to you to earn back your trust, and I will work hard to do so.
President Armacost, would you or the university consider increasing funding to the LGBTQ+ Center to have more staff to provide these resources? It seems that the work falls on one or two people.
Right, I realize that, and in fact, Dr. Bailey and I just talked about this earlier this week, and I think that's a great idea, and we're looking at ways to make that kind of change.
For the next one, multiple times tonight, the phrase "move the conversation forward" was stated. What are some concrete actions the university has taken to have these productive conversations to balance the comfort with the LGBTQ+ community and the rights of other students, namely free speech, association, and religion? And are there any plans? Tambaqui Bailey, could you start us off on that one?
Yeah, sure, I can. I'm gonna say things, and I'm gonna keep saying the same thing because I think that it's important that we hear it. I think that we are, for many people, it feels like we're at a crossroads as an institution. I think that for many people that there's this concern, as said before, in terms around safety, around the value and the respect that we have that they have in the university. I think as we move forward, I think what we have to see concretely is that we're initiating this process. I think this town hall has to serve as one of those initial initiations of this process. I think that I don't, and we don't look for students, for staff or faculty who are part of the LGBTQ community to say, I have to be a starter of the conversation, because then that says that we're not being inclusive. From my perspective, I think we have to have as an institutional priority that we are engaging our communities, particularly those communities who are often marginalized and minoritized in our society. And so I think for us, we have to have those conversations across campus. I think we have to have the conversations in the classroom. We have to have them in the sororities, the fraternities, in the student organizations. We have to have them in the union. We have to have them as we're walking across campus. We have to be willing to hear, what does it mean to have an inclusive campus? I think free speech is important. We've talked about that, and I'll continue to say that's true. I think we also have to make sure that we're not engaging in harassment and making it a difficult environment for people, but that we're working towards making this an inclusive space. It takes all of us. It takes work, right? When we think about the laws that have changed, that were enacted in this country, we start thinking about the Civil Rights Act. We moved away from just the law to how do we start working with and thinking about perspectives and attitudes. I think we have to do that. I think we have to have conversations. I think, so I think it has to be multi-pronged. For those of you who see me every week, I say this all the time. I talk about this idea of being multi-pronged, but I think we have to do that. And I think we have to be committed to this process, right? When somebody's asking what are the concrete things, we can't just do it for the next month. We can't just do it for the next 6 months. That it has to be a priority for the institution. And that's what we hear from President Armacost. And that's, for me, what I think is also important for us as an institution. So again, I'll stop there.
Let me just chime in with a couple quick thoughts. One is, I think there's no stronger statement of a university's commitment than appointing a person like Tambaqui Bailey into the position, a direct report to the president, who is looking at all DEI issues across the campus. I think that's an important piece to remember. And I think, in addition, the opportunity to come across and to compare stories begins. I mean, there are programs on campus that currently exist. Let me highlight one, and you can think of others too. We have Interfaith Week coming up next week. There's a whole sequence of events that happen, and in particular, there's a great intersection with the LGBTQ+ community. And in fact, I think it's Pastor Chad over at Christus Rex who is leading that discussion, but talking about faith and the LGBTQ community. And so there are these great opportunities that do exist. We will continue to look for ways to to increase those. But in addition, you have to see the personal commitment of the senior leadership at events, representing at key functions during Pride Week and other, the QTA meetings and so forth. And you'll see that, I guarantee it.
President Armacost, this one is a question from a faculty member, I believe, asking the question of, do we need to be concerned about the legislature weighing in on what is taught in our classrooms?
Right. So they did in the K through 12 schools, of course. And so that's on critical race theory. And so Tom Bequia and I have talked, and others on campus are talking about how do we engage in productive discussion about what CRT is, what it isn't, and how do we actually raise awareness of the issues that some people seem to be frightened about, but really represent an important part of our history. And when we look at systemic oppression, how do we provide examples, meaningful examples that help illuminate the problems that we face both on college campuses and high schools and grade schools. And so, Tom Bequia, you might have some more to say about this, but yes, we anticipate, I don't know if there's going to be specific legislation, but I'm anticipating that it will be part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think we've seen it. We've seen it a couple of times, right? We've seen the legislators in terms of passing laws relates to teaching history in terms of Indigenous Native American history. I think we've seen it with K through 12 in terms of the what was described as a critical race theory from their perspective. I think we have to continue to think about that. But I also think it's important for us in this institution of education, that's what we're in the business of doing, is that we're looking to understand not only just what are the implications in terms of legislators, but also what does it mean for us to engage in this process of education, right? What is our pedagogy? What are our priorities? What are the things that are important for us? And those are things that we can control. We can continue to educate our legislators on the work that we're doing and clear any misunderstandings, false information, all those things. But I can't every day, we can't every day worry about what the legislators are doing. What we can worry about is what we're doing on this campus and how do we create an inclusive space here. And I think those things are really important. How do we make sure that we're having a collective conversation? And again, others may want to please chime in, but I think if we spend every day, all day worrying about the legislators, then we're going to really limit ourselves in terms of what we see as sound quality education that we're providing to our students.
And we also have to articulate the importance of academic freedom and free speech on campus. And these are principles that a university has to stick to.
President Armacost, if funding was not an issue, would we be moving forward with a draft policy?
As I mentioned, the divisiveness of setting funding aside, the divisiveness that I saw in the week after the press conference really gave me pause and the need for a reset. So there were two key elements that really drove the decision. Setting funding aside. The fact that the protections that were in the draft policy exist elsewhere, combined with the concerns over compelled speech, would have, I would say, likely yielded the same decision to pull back. So in other words, the funding piece, I've said it before, it's out there, but there were other pieces of this, other forces and factors that would have likely yielded the same decision.
We had a question about funding here that's a little bit different. So President Armacost, the question is, we keep referring to the loss of revenue, the loss of funding as being a factor, but the question is, didn't the school just receive a lot of COVID money?
We received a lot of COVID money to cover a lot of COVID expenses. If you haven't noticed, we've been testing a lot, we've been vaccinating a lot, we've revamped our air filtration systems in buildings, we've disinfection systems and so forth. And In fact, the expenses to respond to COVID have outweighed the money that we've taken in, at least at last count. And I wish Jed Shivers would hear, he'd give you the exact numbers, but we got a lot of money to cover extraordinary expenses, tens of millions of dollars of expenses.
Thank you. Tom Bailey, I'm going to address this question to you, that in this discussion tonight, we've been talking a lot about this is a way to start having difficult conversations. What concrete plans does university have in place to move these conversations forward in protecting our LGBTQ+ student rights?
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. And as I hear some of the responses, what I don't want us to start to get into a place where we think that there's one magical thing or some type of action that will resolve everything, that will fix what's happening for us on this campus. I said it earlier and I'll say it again. I think our actions and our initiatives have to be multi-pronged. I think it has to be inclusive of our marginalized communities on this campus. If we start thinking about, and I'm going to focus specifically on our LGBTQ+ community, if we say conservatively, people have talked about 8%. If we look at what some of the social scientists have talked about, somewhere between 13 and 15% of our community, the individuals that are at a place where they're ready to identify or refer to themselves as LGBTQ+. So it's important for us to think that this is our community. And so we have to start there. And so we have to have conversations. We have to make sure it's in our pedagogy. We have to make sure when we're talking about cultural competence, we're not just talking about race, we're not just talking about gender, that we're talking about sexual identity, we're talking about gender identity, we're talking about human rights and the lived experiences of our communities. I think that also means then that we can't make assumptions that we have insider knowledge about various communities. We have to make sure that we're up on the literature, we have to make sure that we're up on best practices, and we have to make sure, somebody asked earlier, how many people from the trans and non-binary community were a part of the task force. I think we have to make sure that we're integrating all of the community into all the great work that we're doing. So there's not one answer. And I know people may be looking for an answer today that they can walk away with and hold in their hand, but it has to be incumbent upon all of us that we say from this day forward that it is imperative that we are acting and that we are engaging in a process where everyone is brought into the fold, and that we're having these challenging conversations and sometimes welcoming conversations, right? I think we have to move towards and not move away. And so I think, again, it's not going to be one thing. There's no panacea. There's going to be multi-pronged. It's going to take time, and we have to dig in. And I'm going to encourage those people who are thinking about leaving, don't stay, right? Contribute to this process. That's how we change this institution. We don't change if we say, well, I'm just going to leave. I'm going to leave it to the fill in the blank, whoever the individuals are that have contributed to the feelings that I have. And so I think we have to stay. I think we have to stay committed. And I think we have to recognize that it is a part of the fullness of the work that we do. So I'm sorry for not giving one thing, but I do think a committed process says we're going to always be engaged. We're not waiting for a particular month, a particular day, or a particular person. That it is a community effort, and we're saying here and now that this is a commitment to us as an institution.
Tom Bequee, someone had a follow-up question for you specifically. How do we keep leadership accountable to keep the conversation going after a month, 6 months, a year?
Yeah, that's shared governance, right? That was the question earlier. That's shared governance. And shared governance isn't just the university senate. Shared governance isn't just being on a task force. So while those things are important, being on search committees, engaging in research, teaching in classes, talking to your peers, all of those things are shared governance. And so how do you keep us accountable? You keep us accountable. We email us, come talk to us, right? And say, hey, this doesn't feel right. And for us to also make sure that we're doing the work, that we're looking at what's happening in across the nation, that we're looking at what's happening for people on our campuses, that we're looking at if there are complaints being filed, if people are talking about hostile environments, or people are talking about ways that they've been able to engage, that we are being, the more we know about that, the more we can continue in that process. But here's what I'll say, and the president said it, the commitment for me to be in this position, but also the commitment for us to have this as a priority for the university. And when we talk about it as a priority, it doesn't make a difference if I'm here, it doesn't make a difference if other administrators are here, but we're saying it's a university priority. Again, I feel like I'm running my mouth, and hopefully for some, it feels like I'm preaching to other preachers. For others, it feels like you're opening your mind a little bit to think about this in a different way. But I think these are things that we have to do. And I think once we start doing this, it doesn't seem so out of the ordinary, and it doesn't seem something so odd for us to do. If we do it every day, then we're used to doing it. And I think that's what will be the mechanism, the kind of the driving mechanism that will keep us going forward. Hold us all accountable. I say it now, and I'm sure it'll come true. Email me, talk to me. I'm not hard to find. So let's make sure we have these conversations. Let's make sure we engage in this process. But let's make sure that we're doing it together. Don't tell me all the bad things I'm doing and then you walk away from the table. I appreciate the destructive feedback, but stay engaged in the process as well. And that then holds me accountable. And I think that holds all of us as administrators accountable.
Thank you. We're getting close to the top of the hour, but we have a question that we haven't hit on yet, and that is about housing. President Armacost, will there be anything done for inclusive housing, an LGBTQ plus specific floor perhaps? So for those that are comfortable with transgender individuals.
Yeah, this proposal actually came up at the QTA meeting. Actually, it wasn't the official QTA meeting, but it was a group of LGBTQ plus students the other night. Jeff was there too. That was a suggestion. Interestingly, it was met with mixed reviews from the entire crew that was there. But this is something we have to examine and to determine if a wing or a dorm or a floor is the right move, and is it the right step for the community? Now, it sounds, on one hand, folks said this would be great to live with those with whom we identify, and others said, the disadvantage is that it doesn't show the rest of the campus who we are, and so there was a real open debate about what the right move was. Jeff, you probably have some additional thoughts.
Yeah, I think you see a lot of institutions that they do have rainbow floors or pride floors or designated spaces. And sometimes like those are received really great. And then sometimes it's very isolating at times too, where you could be creating a target for people, and that can be very dangerous. So I think there's a lot of factors that have to be going into place of whether is this safe for students to have this type of location and be in such a location that is very visible in that space, or is it more about the integration piece? Are there other opportunities for living learning communities? It just kind of depends. We need to engage in those types of conversations, and part of it is really getting that student perspective, learning more about what you all want, surveying you, and getting your opinions. Is this the right move? Is this not a right move? Because you've seen it at both ways, at both institutions, really great, or sometimes it hasn't been very successful. So it just kind of really depends. Is this going to be something that's best for our institution? So that's going to be the conversation that we're going to have to engage in to see what's going to be a good fit. But I think in terms of like the housing, I know I work really closely with our housing team to identify some really great resources for students. Like, is this going to be a right fit in terms of, do I feel comfortable in my identity in choosing my roommates? When I'm filling out my application, am I selecting that I want to have gender inclusive housing or not? So I think those are the factors that we have to make people aware of what their options are, but also getting them connected to our staff. Because our colleagues over in housing, they're going to be able to work with you one-on-one to get you the support that you need so you feel comfortable in your housing assignment.
All right, we have an invitation to the panelists. Would any of you want to join QTA if we do a panel on LGBTQ plus issues or ideas for the UND campus?
Absolutely, I would. I think there are a lot of folks nodding and you can't always see them, so I see lots of nodding heads.
I would too. However, I might just be a distraction, given the I think I've polarized the campus a little bit with this decision. So I would warmly accept that invitation, but we'd have to consider whether it makes sense.
I'm the organization advisor, so I'd probably be involved in some way or shape or another.
An absolutely yes for me.
And you may not be able to see him, but Tom Bailey was nodding his head and giving a thumbs up. So I'm going to say that, yes, he's
Yes,
in as well.
Yes, affirmative, yes.
All right, excellent. President Armacost, I'd like to turn it over to you to see if there's anything you'd like to say as we close out.
Yeah, we've kind of run the gambit of questions, some great questions. Thanks for all the great insights and the challenges that you've issued to me and this entire team. I know some people, I was monitoring the Q&A, some people are unsatisfied with some of the answers. And I would encourage you to keep asking the questions. As we talked about, and as Tom Bequee said, hold us accountable to make sure that you get the information that you need. In addition, again, I think I have to continue to be present, to keep conversations open and alive with the members of the panel, but more importantly with the entire community, and to be present, to let you know that you're welcome up in the office. You can come up and see me anytime, and raise the issues that are of the biggest concern. I have a responsibility to you to make sure that we take care of all of your needs, make sure you have a safe place, but more than just a safe place, a welcoming place that makes you feel that incredible sense of belonging being here at UND. Thank you for being here.